I took a DNA test for fun. Turns out my uncle is actually my dad. I never thought taking a DNA test would change my life. Honestly, it was supposed to be a joke, something fun to do on a lazy weekend, just to see what weird ancestry tidbits would pop up. My parents weren't exactly secretive, but my family has always had a few mysteries here and there, and I figured why not. So, I ordered one of those popular at-home DNA kits, spit in the tube, mailed it off, and forgot about it for a couple of weeks. When the results finally arrived, I expected the usual stuff. Maybe some distant cousins from Europe, a few surprising ethnicities, the typical, you have a 2% chance of being related to this ancient tribe. Nonsense. What I didn't expect was a notification that literally shook me to my core. There was a DNA match labeled as my close family member. Usually, that means a sibling or a parent. The name attached was someone I recognized instantly. My Uncle Greg. Now, I say uncle, but Greg has always been more like a second dad to me. He raised me practically since I was a kid. My biological dad left when I was barely 2 years old, and my mom's relationship with Greg started shortly after. He was there for every birthday, every school play, every heartbreak. I trusted him with my life. But according to the DNA test, Greg wasn't my uncle at all. He was my biological father. I stared at my phone for what felt like hours. My hands were shaking, and I had to double-check the results just to be sure. It was clear. The percentage of shared DNA was way too high for an uncle-nephew relationship. This was the real deal. I wanted to confront my mom immediately, but something stopped me. I needed to process. This wasn't just about genetics. This was about every memory, every moment I thought I understood about my family. Suddenly, it felt like it was built on lies. I spent that night pacing my apartment, thinking back to my childhood, moments that suddenly made a little more sense. The way Greg looked at me sometimes, the extra protective attitude, the secrets whispered in hushed tones. I realized I had been piecing together a puzzle without knowing the final picture. The next morning, I texted Greg, pretending like I didn't know. I said, "Hey, can we talk?" I got the DNA results back. Crazy stuff. His reply was immediate. "Yeah, we need to chat. Come over tonight." That night, I sat across from him in his living room, heart pounding. He looked older somehow, wearier, but his eyes held the same kindness I remembered from childhood. And then he said the words that changed everything. Greg looked me straight in the eyes and said, "I'm your dad." Just like that. No hesitation, no beating around the bush. His voice was calm, but heavy, with years of silence. I wanted to scream, ask a million questions, but all that came out was, "Why didn't anyone tell me?" He sighed deeply, rubbing the back of his neck. "Your mom wanted to. She tried. Many times. But it was complicated. She was scared of how you'd react. And honestly, so was I." I shook my head, struggling to wrap my mind around what I was hearing. "So all these years, you just pretended to be my uncle? Why? Why not just be my dad?" Greg's eyes filled with a kind of regret I hadn't seen before. "Because your biological father, well, the man on your birth certificate, he wasn't ready. He walked away, and your mom was young and scared. I stepped in to help, but we agreed to keep things quiet. She didn't want you to grow up confused or hurt. I loved you like my own son, but we thought it was better if you believed the story we told." The weight of that confession slammed into me harder than I expected. I thought about every birthday party, every holiday, every time Greg had been there. Silent sacrifices hidden behind a simple title of uncle. I realized how many moments I'd taken for granted, how many things I'd misunderstood. "But why tell me now?" I asked, voice trembling. "Why after all these years?" Greg looked down at his hands. "Because you found out on your own. The DNA test changed everything. We couldn't keep lying, not to you, not to ourselves. You deserved the truth." I swallowed hard, my brain spinning with emotions. Anger, confusion, betrayal, and something else. Relief. Finally, some answers. Finally, clarity. "But what about Mom?" I asked. "What does she say?" He hesitated. "She's scared. She's worried you'll hate her, but she loves you more than anything. She just wanted to protect you in the only way she knew." That night, I left Greg's house, with more questions than answers, but also with a strange sense of peace. For years, I'd carried this hole inside me, a missing piece of identity. Now, at least, I had a glimpse of the truth. I knew I had to talk to my mom soon, face the mess head on, but I wasn't ready just yet. I needed time to digest, to figure out who I was, now that everything had shifted. The following days were a whirlwind. I kept replaying Greg's words in my head, trying to piece together what my family had kept hidden for so long. My relationship with Greg had always been strong, but now it was something entirely different. I was no longer just his nephew. I was his son, and that meant rewriting my whole story. After that night with Greg, I felt like I was living in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. Everything I thought I knew about my family was suddenly flipped upside down. I kept thinking about my mom and how she must have felt all those years, keeping such a massive secret. Finally, I decided it was time to talk to her. I needed answers straight from the source. One Saturday afternoon, I called her and said, "Mom, can we meet? There's something important I need to ask you." When I saw her at the cafe, she looked tired, but when our eyes met, there was a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Relief? Fear? I wasn't sure yet. I took a deep breath and said, "The DNA test. It showed Greg is actually my dad. Is that true?" She looked down at her coffee, her hands trembling slightly. Then she nodded slowly. "Yes, it's true." The silence that followed was suffocating. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked softly, trying to keep my emotions in check. She looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "I wanted to, so many times. But your father, the man on your birth certificate, he wasn't ready. He disappeared before you could even remember him. Greg stepped in because he loved us. He wanted to protect you from pain. We thought it was best for you to have a normal childhood." I thought about all the times I had wished for answers, for clarity. "Did Greg know from the beginning?" "Yes," she said. "He loved you from the moment he held you. But we agreed it was safer if you thought of him as your uncle." I could see the weight of years in her eyes, the guilt, the love, the fear. "I'm angry," I admitted, "but I also understand why you did it." She reached across the table and held my hand. "I'm sorry for keeping this from you, but I hope now that you know the truth, we can all start healing." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to rebuild the family I thought I had, now that I knew the real one. Over the next few weeks, I spent more time with Greg. Not just as Uncle Greg, but as my dad. We talked about everything, his fears, the sacrifices he made, and his hopes for the future. The bond we had always shared suddenly felt deeper, more honest. But it wasn't just about him. It was about me, too. Learning to accept a new reality. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed, confused by the flood of emotions. But there were also moments of hope. Moments when I felt seen and loved in a way I never had before. And while the road ahead was uncertain, I knew one thing for sure. Family isn't just about biology. It's about love, trust, and honesty. Still, there was one lingering question I couldn't shake. How would this affect the rest of my family? And could they ever truly forgive the past? After my talk with Mom and spending more time with Greg, I realized this secret wasn't just about me. It involved the entire family. I started noticing subtle shifts in how everyone acted around me. Things I'd never paid attention to before suddenly felt loaded with meaning. One afternoon, I went over to my aunt's house. She's Greg's sister, and someone I'd always been close to. I thought maybe if I could talk to her, she might help me understand everything better. When I brought up the DNA test and the revelation about Greg, her face went pale. Then she sighed deeply and said, "You don't know how long we've waited for you to find out. Your mom and Greg have carried this secret for years, and it's been eating them up inside." She told me stories I'd never heard before, about my mom's struggles as a single parent, Greg's quiet sacrifices, and the complicated dance of keeping up appearances for the family and the community. But she also warned me, not everyone will react the way you hope. Some family members feel betrayed and angry. Secrets like this don't just vanish overnight. That hit me hard. I hadn't even thought about how my grandparents, cousins, or other relatives might feel when this truth came out. I was so focused on my own shock that I forgot the ripple effect. The next family dinner was awkward, to say the least. Conversations felt tense. I caught sidelong glances and whispered exchanges. It was like we were all tiptoeing around an invisible minefield. My grandfather, who had always been strict and traditional, pulled me aside. "Son, this news shook us all. But remember, family is about loyalty. You need to be patient. Healing takes time." His words were wise, but the sting of judgment still lingered. I realized that no matter how much I wanted to fix things, I couldn't rush people's feelings. In the days that followed, I also had to come to terms with my own emotions. Anger towards my mom for hiding the truth. Confusion about my identity. And surprisingly, gratitude toward Greg for stepping up when no one else would. One night, after a long heart-to-heart, Greg said something that stuck with me. "I wasn't perfect, and neither was your mom. But we did the best we could. What matters now is what we do moving forward." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe we could rebuild our family on honesty, no matter how messy. So, I started writing letters. To my mom, Greg, and even to myself. Letters filled with questions, hopes, and sometimes forgiveness. I don't know how this story will end, but I'm learning that sometimes the hardest truths can lead to the strongest bonds. And maybe, just maybe, family is exactly what you make it. As weeks turned into months, I slowly started to rebuild my relationships. It wasn't easy. There were days filled with frustration, arguments, and tears. But there were also moments of laughter, understanding, and growth. I had long conversations with Mom where we peeled back layers of fear and regret. She apologized more times than I can count, not just for keeping the secret, but for the pain it caused. I realized her silence came from a place of protection, even if it hurt me. Greg and I grew closer in ways I never imagined. The dynamic shifted from uncle and nephew to father and son, but it wasn't always smooth. We had to learn to trust each other again and figure out what being dad and son really meant for us now. Family gatherings were still tense sometimes. Some relatives struggled to accept the truth, and I understood their pain. Secrets like this shake the foundation of what people believe about their family. But over time, some walls softened. Small gestures, a smile, a shared memory, a tentative hug showed me that forgiveness was possible. The DNA test that once felt like a bombshell became a catalyst for truth and healing. It forced us to confront uncomfortable realities, but also opened the door to deeper honesty. I also realized something important about identity. Blood doesn't define who you are. It's the love, care, and time spent together that shapes a family. Greg was always my dad, no matter what a test said, and Mom's love was unwavering, despite her mistakes. Sometimes I catch myself thinking about how different life might have been if the truth had come out earlier, but dwelling on what-ifs won't change the past. Instead, I choose to focus on the present and future. I've even started sharing my story with close friends, partly to process everything, partly to remind myself that secrets can't stay hidden forever. I want others to know that it's okay to ask hard questions and seek the truth, even when it's painful. Looking back, the DNA test was more than a fun experiment. It was a mirror that reflected parts of my life I hadn't dared to look at before. Now, as I sit here writing this, I feel a sense of peace. My family isn't perfect. Far from it. But we're real. We're honest. And we're moving forward, one day at a time. So, if you ever find yourself facing a shocking secret, remember this. Sometimes the hardest truths lead to the strongest bonds. And family, real family, is worth fighting for.